People tend to discount their capabilities. Most people are generally humble and they have a high degree of humility, and they don't see themselves as being promotional because they feel that promotion might reduce their cachet in the market. Being proactive versus reactive. Primarily, a project manager would have a reactive relationship. Project managers reacting to market forces. What I want to do first is understand how the project manager feels about going to proactive, which is picking up the phone, getting on an email, sending a text. I need to now go out and take risks in conversation and ask people questions.
Welcome to another episode of the McFarland Method. We've spent the last 2 episodes talking about how to build business value through predictability and ownership mindset. But here's an uncomfortable question. If an owner walked away tomorrow, would the business still run? Would clients stay? Would the bank still have confidence? Most business owners assume that their management team can take over, but when it's time to actually structure a buyout, something becomes painfully clear. Relationships haven't transferred. In this episode and in all episodes, we're going to connect the tactical coaching work to business valuation impact. That's our thesis at the McFarland Method. What we're going to be covering today is talking about succession and transferability. So specifically, why most management buyouts fail before they even get to the bank. I know this the bankable exit's a big theme for you, Dad. So looking forward to diving into this. And then in the members only segment in the coaching group on LinkedIn, in the second half, we're going to be tackling the shadow side. When relationships genuinely don't transfer, when clients don't respect the successors, and when you have to tell an owner that their business isn't actually successionable. But before we get into that, let's kind of go through the high level stuff. So Dad, when you're talking with a coach or preparing a client for succession, what's the first place that relationship transfer problems show up?
In a professional services firm or any firm where there's an expectation of the owners to generate new business or maintain existing business, it tends to be in the transition, they overlook that responsibility. The current owner hasn't spent time transitioning relationships to the successors.
What does that look like? I mean, I think if somebody says, okay, well, how do I know if I've kind of transferred those relationships? When you're doing interviews with people, how do you kind of determine whether or not that transfer has happened?
Well, in the most recent example, I asked the successors what responsibilities they had to proactively bring in business, and they said they didn't have any. So I just asked them.
You just ask them. Yeah. That's a lot of what we're going to be coaching, right? Is just ask the question. There's really no kind of fancy way to get around it or, 10-part questionnaire. Sometimes it's just as simple as, what do you want? Or, what are you doing now?
What are you doing now?
Yeah. Yeah.
How are you spending your time?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so often that I think that it seems like when you start asking those questions, you start sussing out that there's years or decades of avoidance of some core issues that need to be addressed. And so, all right, so let's tie this back, right? So you got in episode 1 and 2, we talked about why businesses need to be predictable to drive business value. And that part of that predictability is driven by key employees with an ownership mindset. Today, we're talking about kind of how that applies in specific cases, especially around management buyouts. Tell me about the psychology of the banker and how that's playing into this conversation. Because key employees, owners might be avoiding stuff, but the bankers, the buyers are not going to be avoiding this. So let's talk about kind of their motivation, how they see the world, and then we can bring that back over to the world of the business itself.
So how does the banker approach the bankability, which is the ability for the buyer to repay the loan? What's their approach to that? That's my thinking. Whenever I'm doing management succession or ownership succession, when a sale to management is, how's the banker going to look at these successors' ability to generate necessary revenue, cover overhead, and create profit that can be used to pay principal and interest on a stock purchase loan? And they're looking for the predictability of that cash flow. So you can show the banker your numbers, and they're going to be seriously considering the efficacy of those numbers. But by and large, what they're looking for is, do they believe that the people that are buying it can sustain it? And that's predictability of the future earnings of the company. And so from my experience, that's what the bank is looking for.
And do they have the same philosophy then that you do? They're just going to come in and ask questions like that? Or how do they arrive at their belief?
It tends to be less direct and more probably observational from my experience. I've not experienced a banker conducting due diligence at the same level of directness that a buyer would. Not that all banks are behaving the same. There's perhaps a little concern about creating conflict with their current client, because typically the lender is an incumbent lender, meaning they've already got the line of credit or equipment loans or real estate loan. They've got a relationship, and they're probably less inclined to challenge the current owner on the capability of their successors to sustain the earnings by having the relationships transferred down to them.
So the bankers probably got an incentive not to be direct, and they're going to be indirectly determining how much they believe that this business is going to be able to sustain beyond, say, the current owner. And so that makes sense. So I'm looking at this, I'm going, all right, how can a coach kind of get a sense for where this is at and start to see the field as for the kind of recognizing this psychological aspect?
That, I think, is the high value opportunity for coaches who are performing meeting facilitation and business planning, and that identifying sustainability of, or the transferability of relationships from the current owner to the new owners. And those relationships probably should start with clients that the current owner is managing. So I'm a coach. I'm not a EOS or a Scale or Bloom or anything, but I'm still acting as a coach. And I'm asking for clarity on who owns the key relationships that are coming back to buy goods or services from you. And if it's professional services, then there's a reliance on a person to manage a relationship. And if it's the current owner, then that owner, if they want to sell that business, they need to transition that relationship, and a coach can stand between the current owner of the relationship and the new owner and facilitate a process of getting that done.
Can you think of any recent examples of having to do this kind of in the field?
Yeah, I just came back from being in the field. Was out in Colorado and met with a general contracting company that's doing near a couple $100 million of general contracting revenue. And it's owned by a handful of principals who all have a business development responsibility. And like most general contractors, the majority of their work is repeat business. They're maintaining the relationship and they're doing it unconsciously. It's the kind of thing that you tend to do. You know you need to do it, and you've gotten into a pattern of behavior and checking in with clients every now and then, going to lunch, seeing them at an association meeting or at a cocktail party, but you're maintaining the relationship either formally or informally. And I see a lot of principles and see a lot of unconscious, competent relationship management going on out there. And so what I did is I asked the owners, how have you positioned your successor to assume responsibility for any of that relationship? And I'm not talking about primary responsibility, but do they have any responsibility for maintaining that relationship? And the answer was yes. And I said, okay, what responsibility do they have? Do a good job on the project. So their relationship management was as a project manager or senior project manager or project exec, was just to do the work well so the client was happy and then would come back. And then when I asked the successors what their role was, they said, yeah, my job is to do the work well. So there's total alignment on what each side of the equation expected. But in the transition, there's no awareness on the part of the doer. In this case, you got the seller and the doer. On the doer part, for what does it take to sell? There's no experience. There's no conversation of what it looks like, how we do it at our company. And so that presents an opportunity for a coach to identify the gap and then start looking for ways to incrementally move the needle on the transition.
So you've got owners that probably came up successfully as sell and do, and then they built a team around them that's dominated by doers. And I hear you suggesting that that a coach can see the opportunity where they know that the owner is heading for an exit at some time period. There's an opportunity to start adding components of that start looking like sales to the roles of the doers. What would be some examples of responsibilities that could be added to somebody's plate kind of incrementally? If you took a project manager that says, I'm not a salesperson, but I'm good with the clients. How do we start kind of building them into effective sales and relationship managers?
So the way I've helped people who are project managers become relationship managers for existing clients is to talk to them about their concerns about being proactive versus reactive. So it starts with the relationship they have with the market, and primarily a project manager would have a reactive relationship, meaning that somebody says they want to do a project, and either that somebody calls the project manager and asks them or invites them into a discussion, or one of the owners hears that opportunity is available and then they hand it off to the project manager. But either way, the project manager is reacting to market forces. And so what I want to do first is understand how the project manager feels about going to proactive, which is picking up the phone, getting on an email, sending a text, going to an association meeting and talking to people. I just want to see how they feel about that, because there's a resistance when you're really technically capable in a role that is, let's say, the company's relying on that technical capability for that person who possesses that skill to step back and look at the world of, I need to now go out and take risks in conversation and ask people questions that I'm not already in an engagement with, or they are not asking me to give them insight as to how we might get into an engagement, which is, preparing a proposal or a bid or an estimate or something like that.
So you got to take somebody that's highly technical and confident and competent. Obviously, you're talking about people that are senior project managers, project executives. They're dealing with huge budgets, tons of complexity, safety, everything from safety to, fit and finish stuff. And they're doing a good job of managing that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in this conversation to begin with, right? So how they're going to be resistant. I think everybody everybody's kind of resistant to sales. You almost meet nobody that's like, oh, I was born to do this, right? I love it. And I feel no friction. So you start to build them up to be a little bit more proactive, start thinking about being proactive in the relationship. And that's a good place to kind of start building up. Does I have that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's understanding what concerns they have about making the shift from, oh, they really want me and I'm just responding because they feel my capability is the quality they're seeking, to I'm confident in my capability and I'm able now to pick up the phone or send some form of message and ask people what's going on in their world, or checking in with them. Hi, how you doing? It's all of those little bitty changes, like just picking up the phone and saying, hey, how you doing, Alex? That's a change in their behavior. That is not how they have behaved in the past. So we can't underestimate the resistance that could exist there.
And it's been my experience that resistance typically comes from self-image, right? So there's some idea that that's not who I am, or that's not what I do. And the reality is that those stories change over time in all different aspects of our lives. So part of the job of the coach then would be to help rewrite the story. What would be some of the key components of the story writing that you would bring to somebody, help them see a more complete picture of their own way forward?
I would usually, if I was going to advise a coach how to go about providing guidance to a subject matter expert who is now considering migrating to a relationship manager with high level of subject matter expertise, I would first start with their past performance and have them share with me the successes that they've enjoyed and what they think they've done that's allowed them to ascend to their current level of responsibility. So I think it all starts with, from my experience, have them explain to me how it is they've gotten to the point where they're now being considered for this opportunity.
So you help them understand the historical patterns, the evidence in the past?
Yeah, like people tend to discount their capabilities. Most people are generally humble and they have a high degree of humility and they don't see themselves as being promotional, and because they feel that promotion might be, reduce their cachet in the market. So there tends to be some resistance to really thinking about how effective you've been in the past. And the reason I start there is that when you make a phone call and ask somebody a question about a project they might have in the pipeline or just how are they doing, you're doing that because especially for subject matter experts, they're willing to make that call probably because they feel like they do really good work and they deserve it. This is the beginning of that feeling of, I deserve to get this project, whatever it is, because I am a capable person who possesses high level of conscientiousness or high follow through, a lot of expertise, can see around corners, having them feel that way.
So we rewrite the historical story. So they're telling them a story that gives them confidence that they can do things that maybe they're already doing. They just see them in a new light. Maybe they add a few more questions that they might have made assumptions on the past, or start responding with questions instead of statements. Let's tie though how do you position the future as part of this story writing?
Well, positioning the future is where we want to live, is they're desiring a change in their relationship with the organization that they're affiliated with. They're going from maybe being a senior project manager who is compensated exclusively through salary and bonus to being considered for ownership, which means now they're going to be compensated with salary, bonus, and then a profits interest. And with that new level of reward comes a higher expectation of contribution to the organization's future. So the only way most of these people can elevate their contribution would be to be part of the business acquisition, the get work activities, because there's doing the work, which they've proven they can do. Now it's how do we get work? And if we start off with, let's see if we can't have enough courage to pick up the phone or send a text or an email to an existing client who's had a great experience with you and ask them to either go to lunch or breakfast or coffee or a cocktail or just have a conversation about what's going on in that person's life, and then transition from waiting for them to call and say, hey, I got a project I want you guys to look at, to, hey, I was wanting to get together with you and see what's going on in your guys' world. And they usually go, God, I'm glad you called. And then the pressure goes down.
Yeah. And we're talking about essentially the early stages of this transition, right? So
yes,
this is at the highest expression of relationship management or sales. It's just the next step for somebody that primarily sees themselves as a technical expert, a delivery person. So let's kind of sum it up then, because we're about halfway through. We're going to be transitioning over to the coaches community here. Here's how I'm seeing it. The banker looks at the unconscious mastery of the owner in the selling of their product or service and goes, hey, there's all the evidence that they can do this is in the balance sheet. It's in the P&L. I've lent money to them before. They've paid it back. We've lent them more money. They've paid that back. We've got this relationship where they go, they look at the new people and they go, these people not only do they not have unconscious mastery, they don't even have conscious mastery. And I think that what I hear you saying is that the coach's opportunity is identifying that gap and then start building conscious mastery in these SMEs and these subject matter experts so that they can then give they can tell a story of predictable future earnings based on current conscious mastery practices. I call all our clients once a month, or we go to we are advertising in these trade publications, whatever the kind of plausible, okay, this is driving revenue. Now let me ask you something like, okay, because I think that's what we're talking about. How will the owner know that that's starting to get traction? Because I think that this is probably an interesting question, that if I became aware that my asset, probably my most important asset, is not transferable until we can demonstrate that my leadership team can sell, I'm probably going to be feeling some anxiety. So where would, what would an owner be looking for as evidence that they're on the right track moving towards predictable future earnings?
An owner would know that they're on the right track and creating predictable earnings in the handoff of key relationships, client relationships in the company, when the client starts calling the successor as opposed to calling the owner. So opportunities are coming to the organization without the owner being the first to know about it. They're briefed on it in a pipeline conversation that the SME who's migrating to a relationship manager, a seller doer, is bringing this new opportunity into their awareness. Now the owner hears the seller doer talking about the project and what they're doing to advance it. And if the owner's satisfied that the steps the new seller doer is taking to advance the project are historically successful based on the way they did things, then they're going to get confidence. And then of course that confidence is codified when they get agreements.
So first you're going to get fewer calls, and then you're going to start getting down the road, you'll start getting agreements that you didn't participate in. And that's when you can really start to settle into the comfort of knowing that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, going from, I think it's working based on the pipeline discussion, to we got contracts that prove that it's working.
And that's what the banker is going to be looking for. And really, this is not just a management buyout truth, right? This is also true for any business that's looking at selling to anybody.
Any business where new clients or existing clients are making buying decisions based upon interpersonal connection, vital to the transferability of that business, that the client relationship is not exclusively tied to the current owner.
Exactly. All right. Perfect. Well, I think that's a good place for us to put a pin in it. So we kind of sum it up. We've got a little statement here about what's the transferable truth from this episode. A business can only be sold to management when relationships, leadership, and business development no longer depend on the owner. Predictable behavior builds predictable revenue, and predictable revenue is bankable. That, I think, is probably a good place for us to wrap the, let's just kind of connect the dots then across the podcast so far. In episode 1, we established that predictability drives valuation. In episode 2, we talked about about who creates the predictability. And those are people with an ownership mindset. And now in episode 3, we've just talked about why transferring relationship management and relationships them with clients matters for those people that are demonstrating ownership. We build value through predictability. We create predictability through ownership-minded people, and we transfer values by systematically moving relationships and decision-making authority away from the founder. So, but here's what we haven't talked about, right? We haven't talked about the ideal situation is what we're talking about right here. But I got to believe that there are examples where successors, yeah, sure, they're willing and capable, but maybe the owner isn't ready to let go, or where clients don't really respect the team. And maybe it's just, there's no way to get around it's just true that the relationships are personal, and that as soon as the owner steps out, they're just not going to be there's not going to be transferability there. So, if you're a coach, you've probably seen some of this. And you probably had conversations where you realize that a succession plan or future planning is based on wishful thinking and not reality. If that's the case, you're probably going to be interested to hear the second half of this conversation. So, thank you for listening to this episode of the McFarland Method. Join our coaching community on LinkedIn to access the full conversation that's going to be available wherever you're hearing this podcast, and new episodes weekly talking about transferable business value and the people systems that drive it. Deb, good episode.
Yeah. Well done, Alex.
No, thank you.
Way to keep me on track.